I'll give you all my cliches. Stoicism's for life. It's not just for Christmas.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's are we saying research? The weird phrase that researchers and clinicians like to use is that Stoicism is sticky, and by that they mean it's one of the big problems in training psychological skills is that people do them and then they work and then they forget about them and revert back to what they were like before, right? And so stickiness is when you teach someone a skill and they do it for the rest of their life or for a long time at least, right? And the idea is like if you teach people CBT skills, they're not as sticky as they could be. Like they work really well, but then a year later, maybe people have just kind of forgotten to do them and they've gone back to their old habits. Whereas Stoicism seems to be stickier because it's almost like a religion or it's a philosophy of life. So it's something people kind of identify with more deeply, and they kind of immerse themselves in it more than they would with CBT. You know, like if you take the best-selling CBT books, like one of the older ones, like David Burns's Feeling Good, like not many people would read it more than once, I think. And not that many. No, you don't see quotes from it plastered all over the internet, and I've never met anyone with it tattooed on their arm or anything like that, right? Yeah. Whereas people you wouldn't believe how many people I've met who've got Marcus Aurelius tattoos, and you know, like they read the meditations over and over again, and you see quotes all over the internet. Because so there's that's important, that matters. The very first book I ever wrote in Stoicism, I talked about how that matters to cognitive therapists. That's the holy grail of psychotherapy in a way, because people are like, to put it crudely, I mean, people are really into this stuff. And they embrace it more deeply and more permanently than they would with CBT. And that's a big deal because it speaks to its longevity. Yeah. And, you know, like you were saying, the trick is... So cognitive therapy is remedial, right? It's therapy. And that means that for various historical and professional reasons, it's mainly a time-limited treatment for specific diagnosable conditions. That's not exclusively, but that's primarily how it evolved, right? So people reach a certain level of diagnosis, and then they're given a treatment protocol that's tailored for that specific problem, and it should only last maybe like 2 or 3 months, and then it should stop, although there may be things that they do to maintain improvement. Like, but basically, it ends when they no longer meet a certain level of severity or diagnosis. Whereas Stoicism, so like the holy grail though of any type of health research is prevention is better than cure. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And Stoicism has the potential to be more of a preventative, or we sometimes say prophylactic approach, rather than a remedial or therapeutic approach. So we do CBT when someone already has a diagnosable problem. They're already anxious or depressed, severely so, and then we do CBT. Now, there are versions of CBT that are meant for milder, what we sometimes call subclinical problems, or for coaching, for example. And there are also preventative training approaches, like the Penn University resilience program that Martin Seligman created, and other resilience training programs that are kind of connected to CBT, partly based on it. But the main bulk of CBT is this kind of remedial clinical therapeutic approach. Yeah. And so Stoicism holds promise as a resilience or a preventative training, where stickiness would be much more important. So you can see if someone's already depressed and you do CBT with them, you might think, well, as long as they're not like severely depressed or suicidal, you know, several months later, then our work here is done. You know, and we can do some kind of maintenance stuff, but they don't need to come to weekly sessions and keep doing all the thought records and everything anymore. Whereas, you know, like Stoicism is like about improving your character, so that you'll be flourishing more in life in general. So it's more kind of like a positive psychology type approach in that respect, but also so you're going to be more emotionally robust and less prone to developing anxiety and depression in the future. And then it's more like what we would call a form of resilience training. But for that to work, it has to last. One of the problems with standard resilience training is that research shows it works. For example, if you train a bunch of school kids to use cognitive therapy techniques and problem-solving skills and mindfulness and stuff, but then if you follow up like 1 or 2 years later, like most of them have stopped doing it. And so it kind of prevents future mental health problems, but you'd have to keep doing refresher courses, which is expensive and time-consuming, right? So you've got a cost benefit thing you have to weigh. Can we afford to do this like on an annual basis for all these kids? Whereas Stoicism, possibly once you get it started, people like continues, like more of its own. Like people are more likely just to identify with it and keep doing it without having to keep having refresher courses. Arguably, we don't know. We haven't tested that yet. We're just beginning to kind of scratch the surface of that. But I think that's the hope for Stoicism's potential.
Do you think that could speak to some sort of I'm trying to think how to phrase this, some sort of inbuilt biological need for our belief system to be based around something that has a religious aspect, like something that is not just a quick fix, but something that is a long-term solution that we would have to adhere to if we are to measure up. I don't know quite how to phrase that, but I know that it's very much a topic of discussion, especially lately in society. And I've heard a lot of interesting debates about whether or not to throw out the institution of religion and what that would do to humanity. And is there any room for Stoicism to be... I don't want to sound like I'm trying to become the evangelical Stoic preacher, but I hope you see where I'm coming from. Like the religious aspect of Stoicism, how important is that?
Well, I guess the way that I'd have to respond to that would be to say, define religion. So we'd have to say, well, what do we mean by religion in this context? So you're talking about actually worshipping Zeus, right? Presumably not.
Well, what I mean, what I mean is the religious behavior of, okay, you get up every morning and you pray, or you get up every morning and you do a Stoic journal where you're, thinking about your, like just like Marcus Aurelius would have done, like very religiously every single day, writing thoughts down about how he can improve, how he, if that makes sense.
I would take it in a different direction, actually. I mean, so it definitely benefits people to have a kind of routine like that they stick to.
That's it.
But then I think you could view that in a completely secular way, right? I don't. You could say it's a routine, but it's secular. It doesn't have to be religious in any sense. But what I think you're touching on maybe is a hot topic in modern clinical research, particularly in the treatment of depression, which is, I'll just think of an easy way to explain this. It's that there's a distinction that modern behavioural psychologists make between what you might call extrinsic and intrinsic values, right? So it's a question about the nature of our fundamental values in life. And the research and the treatment protocols recently suggest that a better way to treat depression. I mean, in the past with depressed clients, cognitive therapists like Beck used to get people with depression to make a list of things that were pleasurable activities, and then to kind of make a schedule to make more time to do things that gave them pleasure. And then cognitive therapists kind of realized, or behavioral psychologists realized, that was a very superficial way of understanding what the opposite of depression would be and what a fulfilling life would be like. And they started to argue, like maybe much like the Stoics, sounding eerily like the Stoics. They said maybe it's not about feelings of pleasure. Maybe it's about the awareness that you're living in accord with your fundamental values. So we don't even quite have the language to articulate this in English, but more like, for want of a better word, what I would call a sense of fulfillment rather than a feeling of pleasure or subjective happiness. So, like, for depressed people, what they're really lacking isn't, the kind of pleasure that you get from eating chocolate or having sex or something that in the sense it just gives you a temporary buzz or whatever. It's more like a sense of meaning and a sense of satisfaction and a sense of purpose, and that kind of contentment or satisfaction that comes at arguably a much deeper and more cognitive level, feeling that you're living in symmetry with your own values. And that's what Stoic virtue is. Like the whole concept of virtue in Stoicism is intrinsic value. It's a character of your quality, a quality of your character rather, and your actions, rather than kind of external things that you may or may not succeed in achieving. And so, like, I mean, modern behavioural therapy for depression asks people to engage in really a philosophical U-turn or conversion and change in actually a meta-ethical way, in a really deep, fundamental way, to change their whole way of thinking, not just about what sort of values they have, but about the whole nature of value itself. Actually, it's quite a radical thing. And, like the Stoics were saying exactly the same thing. To put it very simply, to really simplify the message, the Stoics said, look, you're born, you go out into the world, you look around you and you see people running around after money and sex and reputation, and all of the external trappings of fame and success in the world. And you think, I guess that's what must matter in life. And everybody talks as if it does, and you start to copy them, and you start to talk and think like them. But when you actually reflect on it very deeply, the Stoics said any one of us should be able to realize that these things are merely a means to an end. Money in itself is just a piece of paper. It's worthless, it's trivial. What matters is how you use it. Right? You can use money to do terrible, dictatorial, oppressive, vicious things. You could blow it all on crack cocaine. Or you could use it, to do really philanthropic and rewarding and fulfilling things that give you a sense of purpose and life satisfaction. So the money in itself is kind of merely a crutch. It's merely a means to an end. So you need to be asking yourself, what's the point of all of this stuff? Why, are you pursuing reputation and fame and external success and wealth and stuff? What is it you're trying to actually get out of it? And the Stoics would say, ultimately, it's enlightenment. It's Sophia, phronesis, it's moral wisdom, was their argument. And the Stoics really just echo what Socrates said. They're very much Socratics in that respect. Socrates in the Euthydemus says, define good fortune. And his interlocutor says, this is a no-brainer question, Socrates, right? Most of the questions Socrates begins by asking, it seems a rhetorical question. He's like, well, good fortune means having wealth and success and noble birth and having lots of friends and status in society. Everybody knows that. And then Socrates goes on to say, but all of these things can be used badly. And his conclusion then is that these things are merely opportunities, and what matters, a good and wise man will use wealth and reputation to do wise and good things, and a vicious and foolish person will use them to do vicious and foolish things. So his conclusion is it can only be moral wisdom that makes these other things good and worth having, and it can only be vice and folly that makes them negative or dangerous or harmful in life. It's the use we make of them that matters. And the Stoics said, the point of the Stoics, and following on from Socrates, is that we're all ignorant of this. Because we look at other people and see what they're doing on the outside, and we're duped into thinking that the goal of life is to get all this external stuff. And we all naturally have this kind of natural, as you said a minute ago, almost a physiological or hardwired, ingrained genetic predisposition to forget the meaning of life, to forget that the goal of life is eudaimonia, or the kind of fulfillment that comes from living wisely and in accord with our fundamental values, preserving the integrity of reason. So we can see these things clearly. But modern therapists have rediscovered this, and they say, look, in depression, we can't just be telling people, make a list of things that make you feel happy and that are pleasurable. So what would you be doing? You're just going to sit and masturbate and eat chocolate all day and play video game. There's definitely something wrong with this way of looking at it. You need to dig deeper. You need to dig deeper and identify the things that are actually going to make you. The way that I would explain it, more in line with what the Stoics would say, is it's almost more a question of what would make you proud of yourself. So what would give you self-esteem and allow you to be able to, whereas you're laying your head down to sleep at night, look back on what you've done during the day and feel a sense of satisfaction and actually like yourself as a person. They talk about, the fool is alienated from himself. Marcus Aurelius at one point says, why would you listen to the criticisms or the opinions of people that don't even approve of themselves? And so his assumption is that vicious and foolish people are at odds with themselves. They're conflicted, like they're disintegrating psychologically. They don't even agree with their own values. Like, and he thinks that's all of us. We're all in this mess, right? But the wise man is more, one of the words that Stoics like to use, their original definition of eudaimonia was living in agreement, and then they added with nature later. But the Greek word implies in a number of things, but in part it implies living consistently. I.e., when Socrates used to cross-examine people and use the Socratic method, the elenchus we call it, his method of questioning, which we still use a variation of in modern cognitive therapy. The word elenchus is the word that the Greeks would use for cross-examining a witness in court. But Socrates said we should do that to ourselves regarding our moral values. And his goal, he says, was to identify a sort of hypocrisy or inconsistency in our thinking. And what's the outcome of that? Once you've really questioned yourself, Socrates and the Stoics think, is to have a more rounded and internally consistent worldview, where you're actually acting in a way that has integrity and is consistent with your genuine beliefs and values in life. But prior to that, we're all liars and hypocrites, and the life that we live is completely at odds with what, on reflection, we would say is the point of it all. And they think we just need to sort this mess out. We've got into this mess because the society that we live in, and because this predisposition to be led astray by things that we see going on around, is a perennial problem. And they said the Stoics describe it as epistrophe, a U-turn, like a conversion. We have to kind of do this radical upheaval where we swim against the tide of society, dig deep, and really ask ourselves what the purpose of life is, and then start living more consistently in accord with that. And they thought of that as really requiring the Cynics, the predecessors, the Stoics, symbolized this by walking backwards along the street. Or when people were coming out of a theatre, they would walk into the crowd, and they did that partly to train themselves to be oblivious to criticism and embarrassment. But it also symbolized their whole philosophy of life. They said, we need to start to swim against the tide and do the opposite morally of what everybody else around us seems to be doing. Like, they all want money and fame and success and for everybody to like them and stuff, and we've got to shatter these idols and start again from scratch and reconstruct a morality that's actually based on what's in our hearts, like in the things that we genuinely value in life.